So I just want to talk about something a little bit different. There have been so many changes in presbyopia treatment, some of which are not FDA approved yet, some of which are recently FDA approved. You probably have some other things here in India that we don't even have in the United States, so I apologize if I missed some of those. There may be some things you can tell me about after this. No financial disclosures. So I think, and this was geared towards the residents and the fellows, so most of you are probably familiar with this, but when we're young, we have a huge amplitude of accommodation, so 7 to 10 diopters, which is why a lot of people can be hyperopic, not even be bothered by it, and make up for it for, most of the time when they're young. But then over time, that for all of us, that decreases, so that by age 50, the accommodative amplitude has decreased to about 1/2 of a diopter. And most of these patients start reporting symptoms as early as the 40s. So especially with the patient population getting older, this is going to become more and more of an issue. So there are a couple of reasons why this occurs, and really nobody knows 100% the exact mechanism of presbyopia, even though it's something that's been studied for hundreds of years. There are sort of two general groups of theories, and they probably all have some validity. There are probably a multitude of factors that are all contributing. But basically there's some lenticular changes. As we know, even before cataracts become visually significant, the lens does undergo changes. It becomes thicker, less pliable. So that is definitely one of the factors that affects accommodation. But it's probably not the only factor. There's also changes in the ciliary muscles and then the posterior zonules, and even changes in the vitreous probably all affect leading to this loss of accommodation over time, which is important when we start thinking of ways to correct presbyopia. By correcting just one of these issues, most people are focusing on just correcting the lens, probably not actually addressing all these issues. So unless we can figure out a way to address all these issues, we'll probably never have a true, really accommodating intraocular lens that simulates the natural lens. So this is a huge global problem. The last reported estimate was 1.04 billion people globally, but expected to increase to 1.37 billion by 2020, which is incidentally kind of funny. That's actually happens to be India's 2019 population that I just looked up. So imagine everyone in your country, that's how many people are affected by this by next year. So there are luckily lots of options. Glasses is by far still the most popular option. Contact lenses are also an option, although I know with the environment here that sometimes are a little bit more of a challenge depending on where people live. Different forms of refractive surgery, corneal inlays are kind of a newer thing that's still in development, and then the intraocular lenses keep getting better and better. So glasses, I think a lot of times we kind of dismiss those, or patients say, I don't want to wear glasses, but really for a lot of people they're great options, very inexpensive, especially the over-the-counter readers, really minimal investment. So for the early presbyopia, this is probably the best option, definitely a good thing to start with. Not entirely benign. There have been some publications showing that bifocal and progressive lenses do lead to an increased fall, especially as people are adjusting to those. But overall, they're your cheapest and most benign option. Contact lenses are a good option for some patients, especially the early presbyopes. Unfortunately, a lot of people, by the time they're presbyopic, they've never worn contacts before. It can be a hard thing to adjust to. So this isn't always a long-term option for our patients, especially if they have any dexterity issues or some dry eye. This may not be their option. I use contact lenses mostly to sort of simulate what surgery would be like, especially if a patient is maybe undecided, thinking about some monovision, or thinking they might like a multifocal intraocular lens, but not sure. If they're either don't have a cataract or have very mild cataract, that can be very helpful. And then corneal surgery, we're going to focus mostly on corneal surgery and then intraocular lens options. So there's been multiple types of corneal surgery attempted to try to correct presbyopia, none of which are perfect, which is probably why they keep coming out with new surgeries. Different forms of LASIK and PRK have been tried to correct presbyopia. There was something called Intercourt that came out about 2009. It was very briefly popular. And then laser and conductive keratoplasty, which sort of faded away in the U.S., but now is actually undergoing kind of a resurgence in some parts of South America. I don't know if that's something that's performed here regularly. And then the newest thing, which is the corneal inlays. So laser thermal keratoplasty, conductive keratoplasty were probably the first really semi-successful corneal surgery to correct presbyopia. They both work by the same principle, just different mechanisms. It's basically whether or not you use a laser or you use radio waves. But either way, you're basically making circular patterns on the cornea at different diameters and different numbers of spots to try to basically shrink the collagen fibrils and then induce basically some presbyopia, induce some myopia in the central part of the cornea. So this is what it actually looks like, depending on what kind of probe you use. This is a conductive keratoplasty. You basically heat up this parts of the cornea in spots, and then there are algorithms that determine how much myopia you could induce based on where you place those spots. You can also use it to correct a little bit of mild astigmatism or mild hyperopia. It was popular in the United States for a brief period of time, but the effect wears off over time, and so it really isn't that popular anymore. It's a pretty safe procedure, but I do have one patient that was treated with this before I started seeing her, and actually either something happened during the surgery, she moved, the surgeon moved, something happened, so she actually has some scarring right in the center of the cornea, that's quite visually significant for her, so it's not 100% safe. There was something called Presby-LASIK that very briefly was popular, but has pretty much gone away, and I don't think anyone's performing this anymore, where you actually had different algorithms programmed into the LASIK laser. I'm not sure which platform it was done on, because again, it was a little while ago, where you basically induced a multifocal cornea under the LASIK flap. Interestingly, there are two different algorithms people use. Some where they actually made the central portion of the cornea more relatively myopic, and others where they made the peripheral portion of the cornea relatively myopic. Apparently the quality of vision was quite terrible for this, and the patients were very unhappy, so I think that did not last very long. There was something called Intercourt that came out briefly. It was 2009 to 2012, and then I haven't heard anything about it since then. And it almost is like cutting an intraocular lens into the cornea. It's an interesting concept. And then there were some papers coming out showing it combined with RK, which seems like it would get quite a bit of halo and glare. So again, this has been very popular, just trying to give you kind of a comprehensive history, though. You may see some patient with this. So the newest thing are corneal inlays, and there have been corneal implants done for other reasons besides presbyopia historically. There was the epikeratofakia that was done quite some time ago for aphakia, where we actually implanted donor corneal tissue. And then we have the keratoprosthesis that we use for more severe corneal pathology. We saw some nice talks on that this past weekend. The Intacts, I think, have fallen a little more out of favor now with the scleral lenses, the Athens protocol, but they're still definitely an option, and it's a good surgery for the right patient with keratoconus. And then there have been some attempts at other synthetic corneal implants that were miserable failures back in the 50s and 60s. So the keratophakia is something that I haven't seen myself, but I have heard of, and that was, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Let's see, we're going to, so pretend I didn't have the keratophakia there, sorry about that. So the corneal inlays in general, they're all performed sort of similarly, placed in an intrastromal pocket or under a LASIK type flap. All of them are very dependent on centration, because really you're basically inducing some kind of multifocal cornea, so you need to have that center part right in the center. Usually you only implant them in non-dominant eye because it does affect your distance vision. And there's currently only one FDA-approved version, that's the Camera, made by AcuFocus. There was a second FDA-approved version called the Raindrop. It was also formerly known as a Presby lens and the View lens. That was actually only on the market for about less than 2 years, and it was pulled from the market. And there's currently a big FDA recall going on because of all the haze that develops from that. There are also new inlays in development. The FlexiView micro lens is in trial, so we'll see what happens with that. And then the Icona Lens is available outside the United States, but is not currently undergoing trials in the United States. So sorry about that. That was a mistake there. So the camera inlay, again, this is the only one that's FDA approved. It's actually a really neat concept. So I know that when you see a patient in the clinic and they do the pinhole, patients always say, oh, I wish I could just have that pinhole all the time, and that's so great. And so this company, the AcuFocus, said, well, let's put the pinhole in, make it all the time. So the concept, I think, is really quite an interesting one. And it's actually been available in Europe for over 10 years now, and it was FDA approved in the US in about 2016. So I've been quite some experience with this. The pinhole effect is basically works just like the pinhole effect in the clinic with the occluder, where you increase your depth of field. So it's basically a clear, other than the pinhole, clear, I think it's called the polyvinyl fluoride disc. That's something, that material has been used before in intraocular lens haptics, but not in the cornea. It's got the 1.6 central annulus, which acts as a pinhole, with the outer diameter of 3.8. So that 1.6 was what's been calculated to give you the best field of vision. It does have laser etched openings so that you do get some flow through the device, because that obviously is a big concern in terms of blocking nutrients and going to the cornea. And initially it was recommended to be in a femto laser enabled pocket at 200 microns. With that, they got a lot of haze and some hyperoptic shift, so they actually changed that recommendation to between 230 and 280 microns. Sorry, give me 1 minute. So the FDA trial results were pretty interesting. About 400 patients were operated on, and there was a pretty significant hyperoptic shift in about 10% of patients, but again, with the adjusted protocol, that did improve. About 8.7% of the inlays were removed during the study. So with the optimization protocol, that improved to 4%, but I do think the 8.7 is a bit high for a very, very elective procedure. So initially when this came out, I was very excited about it. So I actually talked to the company, I did the training, it's very easy to do the actual procedure. But then when I sort of went through all of this to decide if I wanted to recommend it to my patients, it's a significant cost to the patient, and also you have to buy a lot of equipment at the outlay. And with this many complaints, on removal, I actually don't offer this to my patients, and actually none of us do. I was the person who kind of volunteered to look into this and see if this was something Wilbur wanted to offer, but I didn't think that the patient results were good enough at this time, and that may change if it becomes better. So the FDA trial was good, but the results weren't, they were good but not amazing. And what I mean by that is you did get a little bit of a decrease in the uncorrected distance vision in that eye by about a half a line. Now, interesting that only got the patients to 20/20, so these patients were patients with pretty much perfect vision to start with. That was one of the requirements. They had to have 20/20 vision, uncorrected. Their near did improve, but only by about 2.4 lines, so it didn't really give them full functional reading. It really gave them more intermediate reading. So they did well at like computer intermediate tasks, but for full reading, it really wasn't quite enough. They did a confirmatory study, as I mentioned, when they optimized those protocols, and they did get better results with that, less hyperoptic shift, and less had to be removed. So the Raindrop, that's another one. Again, I did the training on that. It's really easy to do. Basically, the only thing is you have to make sure the centration is very, very critical. Anyone who could do LASIK or SMILE could easily do this procedure, but unfortunately, the results were not very good. Basically, it implants this small little lenticule right in the center of the cornea, so only about 2 millimeters, and it results in this hyperprolate cornea. So it almost gives you that sort of Presby LASIK type of a multifocal cornea, which again, the quality of vision we know wasn't good with the Presby LASIK, and then combine that with a lot of haze with these lenticules, the vision really wasn't that good. And the other thing is, this device was really only, it was really indicated for such a small group of patients. Basically, had patients, age 41 to 65, who had pretty close to perfect vision. They had to be phakic, and the manifest refractor had to be quite small, as you can see. These can't be people with big refractive errors. And having any kind of refractive surgery was a contraindication to this. So these have to be people who are basically naturally pretty close to plano without significant cylinder, who basically just require reading ad. And they're very adamant about not doing this before LASIK. The camera also is not technically approved after any kind of refractive surgery, but there have been reports of people doing it with good results in combination with refractive surgery. That's off-label, though. So the FDA trial results that got the Raindrop approved were, again, about 400 patients, and they had to have very good vision initially. They did get a significant decrease in their distance vision from about 20/20 to about 20/30, but got a little bit more near than in the camera. However, 4 patients did experience a loss of better than 2 lines of best corrected vision, and that took about 6 months to achieve refractive stability. And look, again, the complication rate is quite high. It was, over 10% at 36 months, and they're finding over time now, even despite the recall, that complication rate is going up. So actually, it looks like almost all patients who have this do develop some significant haze over time. So I think there's a big lawsuit going on right now too. So this was actually pulled from the market. So the FlexiView lens is the newest option that's at FDA trials now, so we'll see what happens with that. It's almost like a bifocal implant in terms of you have a non-refractive central optical zone, and then you have a refractive ad that you can choose ranging from +1.25 to +3.5. So that's sort of nice that you have different increments so you can tailor that to your patient. The company even says, oh, and you could replace it with a higher ad over time, but I'm not sure that's going to happen, but they do advertise that. So we'll see what happens with that. None of the trial results are finalized yet, so we really don't know. So the enrollment's completed, and it was supposed to be completed, but we don't have the actual final FDA results yet, so we don't know if this is going to get approved. But there were, look at this number. So I think it said there were about 400 patients, and that's how many post-operative report events there were. So I'm thinking this one may not do any better than the other. And so you do get a big increase in the uncorrected near with the treated eye, but they only have so far reported binocular uncorrected distance vision. They haven't reported the monocular uncorrected distance vision. We don't know how much that drops in exchange for that increase in near. There's something called the Icona Lens that's is in progress, but we don't have any information on that yet. That's, again, a similar model where you have a hydrophilic acrylic hydrogel lens. So it's almost like taking a lens implant and putting that into the cornea. That's got a neutral central zone and then a peripheral optical zone with a fixed 3 diopter ad. So it's probably going to be similar to the FlexiView. So right now, really, the camera is the only option available. It does have some cosmetic effect that probably won't be as much of an issue in India as it is in the U.S., where some people have very light eyes. It's pretty noticeable. People who have eyes like mine, where they're very light colored. You don't get much of an effect. There's not too much of a decrease in distance, so that's good, but there's not really that huge of an increase in the near vision. Supposedly, they've done visual field testing with this, and that you can still do visual field, that you can still do a retina exam. That's per the company, though, and I'm not sure if that's been really widely studied by people outside the company and not affiliated with the trial. In terms of the quality of the vision, it's pretty good. So I think overall it's an option, but only for a very, very small selective group of patients. So some of the concerns about that is you're implanting that into the cornea via flap. You have all the flap complications associated with LASIK, plus you have the interface haze potential. It's quite an expensive outlay. You have to have a femtosecond laser, plus you have to have their proprietary software and actually a proprietary machine to use for the preoperative planning. It is removable if there's problems, but some people still do have haze that doesn't go away. And then the question is for phakic patients, what's your plan for future cataract surgery? They said you can leave this in, but the question is, would you want to do that, or would you put in a different kind of lens, and how is that going to affect your calculations? So we really don't know sort of long-term the data of this. And also these patients have to be on steroids for 3 months. So if you have someone who's kind of in their 40s, 50s, put them on steroids for 3 months, that may take that cataract from not visually significant to visually significant and make them need cataract surgery earlier too. So we're going to talk about lenses next, but there's one interesting thing I found when I was looking at sort of things that have been tried in the past for presbyopia. As I mentioned, there are so many different factors affecting presbyopia development, including one is based on, in theory, scleral rigidity. So actually, there have been some groups that have looked at actually doing scleral-based surgery for presbyopia. This is something that's kind of reported posters and not peer-reviewed literature. So it'll be interesting to see if any of this ever develops into anything. But so far, it's not ready for prime time. So the most common, and I think the most reasonable option for surgery at this time, for presbyopia, are the lens-based surgeries. Unfortunately for that, we keep getting better and better options. So there's cataract surgery refractive lens exchange. I don't know how exactly it works. In India, it's probably similar in that really the main difference is just the cost to the patient. For us, cataract surgery is usually covered by insurance. Sometimes there's an additional charge for one of the presbyopia correcting lenses, but patients do have the option of doing what we call refractive lens exchange, which is basically they pay for cataract surgery out of pocket if they don't have a visually significant cataract. That's rare, but it's actually becoming more common now that the Symphony is available, and we'll see now that the PanOptix is available if that also affects, if that also becomes more common. So a lot of times if they have very mild cataract or are interested in refractive lens exchange, then I think it's worth trying to simulate vision either with a monovision or with a multifocal contact lens to see if they would be happy with it. One thing I really like about the multifocal contact lenses is the quality of the vision is not nearly as good as the quality of the vision with the intraocular multifocal lenses. So the good thing is if they're happy with the multifocal contact lenses, you're pretty much sure they'll be happy with the multifocal lens implant. And then if they're not, you can figure out why they're not and see if that would be something that would be relevant to the lens implants. So this is definitely a big market for all of the companies. So there are always new lenses coming out for intraocular lenses, different presbyopia options, and they probably could give talks for hours and hours on just the different options, and then we don't know which ones are going to pan out over the long run. But the first really presbyopia correcting lens that was FDA approved for us was the crystal lens. The FDA results were really great, and the concept was quite amazing. It's also now available as a toric, because the concept was the theory that it kind of worked like your natural lens, where it moved as your lens would have moved naturally. But I found in practice that these patients really haven't gotten that much accommodation, so I actually don't use this for my patients. And then there are some new accommodating lenses in development, so hopefully some of those maybe will have a little bit better result. The crystals really only give you about 1 diopter accommodation, but some of the newer ones have more promising results with closer to 3 diopters. The Synchrony is kind of a neat idea. It's basically 2 different lenses that in theory kind of move together and do give you quite a bit of accommodation. The lens itself needs, I think, some tweaking. It needs a really large incision, and it's kind of an awkward lens, so we're going to see what happens with that. Some of the more interesting things that I think might develop, but we don't know yet, is there's a new lens and a fluid vision lens, and both of those actually, the lens itself changes shape. Again, you need some accommodation from the rest of the eye, so these lenses all basically assume that all of the presbyopia problem is based on the lens itself, because that's all you're correcting. If your ciliary body is working, these aren't actually going to work. And then there's actually people looking at using actually electroadaptive optics, which could be interesting, but again, that's something that's, I think, pretty far into the future. So we have a lot of multifocal lenses, and these have gone through, even just since I've been in practice, there are so many different generations that have already come and gone, and I think they do keep getting better and better. So they all have a similar concept where you have multiple focal points that are going to give you multiple images at different focal ranges. The goal and idea is that the patient's only going to perceive the focused image of interest. Now, there are some patients that are more or less able to do that, and so some patients really don't do so well with these. And there are lots of different options. So the initial types of multifocal lenses that came out, the Resume is one that was pretty popular for a while, is basically you had kind of centralized zones. You had your basically concentric rings, distance near, and they were pretty much distance and near, were really not much intermediate range. So a lot of people didn't like them for that reason, and also because there was such a difference between the lens, the far and the near, people got a lot of glare and halos with that. And these initial refractive multifocal IOLs were very dependent on pupillary response, so depending on your patient, if the pupil doesn't react very well, they're not going to work for them. The next generation we're billed as being pupillary independent. So for people whose pupils may have not been normal or not as reactive, these, in theory, work well. So these actually are based on the light coming in, and supposedly the transition zones were much smaller. So again, less glare, less halo, and you're going to basically redirect the light to the area of interest. So examples for that were the Technic multifocal, and the Alt Lisa, which I think you guys have. Do you guys have the Alt Lisa here? Okay, we're not. I've heard great things about those lenses, but we don't have them, unfortunately. So the ones that we have most commonly now in the U.S. probably of the actual true bifocal lenses are the Icona Restore lenses. So that's got basically a gradual reduction. So you have more dramatic step increases in the center versus the periphery, and you have more more of your distance is focused in the periphery versus more of your center is focused in the, more of your near is focused in the center. So for a while we had the Restore, really there's a true bifocal for far and near, and then because people now do so much more intermediate with laptops, tablets, all that, they came out with the 2.5, or they call the active focus, and that's been around since 2015 now, where basically you have much more distance concentration with a much smaller concentration of near. And you can see the near here is really only, it's pretty small, 18% versus 70% distance. So I used this lens when it first came out, but I found that the amount of near that the patients got, they didn't feel it was worth paying extra versus a regular distance lens. But, you know, I think some people might like it, but I've been kind of underwhelmed by that. So if you look at just the comparison of the 2.5 versus the 3, so you have your central distance. This is 100% distance, whereas this was about 40% distance, and then this is all distance as well. So here you've just got a little bit of intermediate, basically. So this kind of shows you the way the ranges work. So you can see the 2.5 has much, much better distance. This is your distance line, versus the 3.0. And then you can see this, the trifocal here, this is the alt least, it doesn't have nearly as good of a distance. Now I'd like to see this chart come out. I'm sure they'll update it soon with the pan optics, and that'll be interesting to see, because I think the distance with the pan optics is supposed to be pretty good. But again, then if you look here, it's kind of more your intermediate range. Most people prefer intermediate about here, about somewhere between 80 and 50, so about 60 usually. So that's really good for the 2.5, but you really don't have much reading at all. And then you can see the reading is much better for the 3.0, but you don't have much intermediate. So because of those downsides, a lot of people do it mix and matching. So they'll put a 2.5 in one eye and a 3.0 in the other. So that does give patients a much better range of vision. And it's not quite as hard to tolerate as like a mono vision. But again, you're still going to get the glare and the halos. So the Symphony is the one that I have the most personal experience with, just because I've gotten the best feedback with it. So that's when I prefer for my patients. Again, we just got approved the pan optics. We'll see how that all pans out. But I still don't quite understand how they get the vision so good, because even though you have the rings here, and you have the rings, you see them when you put them in the patient, the glare and halo really isn't as bad as with any of the other bifocals that I've tried before. So, and they also say it's independent of the independence of pupil effect. So the patients do get a nice range of vision here. Now, the near is not as strong as with the traditional bifocal lenses, even though they say it is. So it's like all of these lenses, these are all available as single-piece lenses, only for primary, non-complicated cataracts, or you don't put these in the sulcus or anything. It's available with and without astigmatism correction. And then maybe it's this they say they have a frosted design to reduce potential edge effects, because I really, like I said, I don't see as much of a halo effect with this as with the older lenses. This is from the FDA trial for the US. The results were pretty impressive. So there's only about 300 patients, but since then, many thousands have been done. I think it's pretty correct. So the distance and intermediate were both about 20/25, and then the near was only about 20/30. So I usually tell my patients, your distance and intermediate will be pretty much perfect. Your near won't be as good. I usually tell about 20/40 or so for near, is what they should expect, but it'll be much better than it would be with a monofocal lens. And I think that's pretty true. So it does give you a really good range of vision. Available as a toric lens. It's built on the old ZC-BOO platform, so it's very easy to implant. Not too many visual aberrations. You do still get some visual aberrations. I'd say probably about 1% of my patients really are bothered by the glare and the starburst, whereas most patients don't seem as bothered by it. The cost obviously is the cost is obviously a big issue. So again, my personal experience, most people do really well with this lens. The halos are there for most people. Usually by about 3 months they go away, sometimes closer to 6 months. I have one patient who's I'm considering explanting in and putting in a standard toric for, but I think I've done about 300 or so of them. So I think one patient being that unhappy isn't too bad. So overall, pretty happy. Usually I aim for about a -1/4. Except in myopes, I usually aim a little bit more, about closer to -5, because they don't tend to be quite as happy with the reading. And then based on the response to the first, I'll adjust the second eye. Hyperopes seem to love it. The myopes, love the distance, love the intermediate. I warn all my myopes now that I said you're going to need some low power reader glasses if you're going to actually want to read, and that seems to make them happier. So that's one thing I've learned. So this is the newest thing available. We literally just got FDA approved a couple weeks ago, which I'm pretty excited about. There is a toric option. It's got basically it's got your near, your distance, and your intermediate. And the results from the trials in Europe have been pretty amazing. So we'll see if it all holds up in clinical practice. I know you guys have already been implanting them here, so I'm excited to see what your experience has been. But I think it's been pretty good. And so it's kind of interesting. So how does it work with the trifocal? Because when we looked at the old trifocal graph with at least the distance wasn't that good. But basically what they did is they basically made about 50% of the lens for distance, and then they sort of made two splits where they have another split for intermediate and another split for near. So they said that can give them the best distance and then also give them the good near. So they have this sort of strange pattern here where you've got your basically it's actually sort of 4 levels here, but then they said they kind of squished these two together. So it's actually really, I don't quite understand it, but it's really they've got 4 different zones, but then they somehow combine the two into 2 distance zones, so you get more distance. Seems to work for them though. So this is just comparing the PanOptix versus the Restore. So you can see you have a bigger diffractive zone here, and actually the near, I was surprised to know, is actually more than it was with the Restore, and you also have that intermediate. Both right now are available in the yellow tinted lens, which I'm not crazy about. They said they are going to be coming out with a clear version, because I think there are lots of patients who have a clear lens in one eye and may be interested in this lens, but I'm hesitant to put a yellow lens in a patient who's got a clear lens in the other eye. But in summary, there are lots of options for your presbyopic patients. I think starting with glasses is a reasonable option. Contact lenses, the refractive surgery, unless you want to do monovision with LASIK or PRK, probably not a great option. The camera inlay is the only one commercially available at this time. And then the intraocular lenses just keep getting better. So I think that's really our best option now. And there are even some newer intraocular options that are coming out down the pipe. The company that makes the camera actually has in development a Pinhole IOL, which I think is a really interesting option. So that'll be something that I think will be good for 2 groups of patients. One for the presbyopia patients, but also sometimes those patients with the really abnormal corneas, maybe a lot of distortion in their corneas, maybe irregular corneas post-surgery. I think those patients actually, I'm really curious to see how they will do with that lens. So when that comes out, that's something I'll look into. And then it's funny, if you go on Amazon, you can even buy pinhole glasses. So you can tell that to your patients if they say they'd like to have those pinholes all the time. And then there is a company saying that they're producing actually eye drops to decrease presbyopia. So we'll see what happens with that too. So, so it's hard to choose for the patients. There are so many choices, but I think the important thing is to try and figure out, match the right, lens option or surgery option with the right patient. So the patients who are very bothered by any kind of visual aberration, don't traditionally do that well with any of the multifocals. Even I do have a patient who, I did her surgery. She had been a very high hyperope with a lot of astigmatism, put a toric lens in. Vision was perfect, but she was very bothered. She actually noticed the point-like distribution effect from the markers on the toric lens. So then, something I should have asked her before surgery, I asked her after surgery. I said, what do you do for a living? I calibrate the telescopes for NASA. So anyway, I probably should have done nothing. But so it's good to know, these kind of patients, patients may be bothered by things that most people wouldn't notice, and then you want to factor that in with your lenses. So overall, hyperopes are much happier because they're used to having poor vision at pretty much every distance. Your mild myopes and your emmetropes are going to be a lot harder. Engineers get a bad rap, and I know in India there are very many engineers. So I don't think they're actually engineering is a contraindication to any of these lenses. I think it's just they like to really know how it works. So I always tell them, give lots of information, tell them to do lots of research, and then they can make their decision. So actually, a lot of my engineers are very happy, and they actually get very excited about they can explain to me how the lenses work, and they get very excited about it. So sometimes they're actually great patients for these. Driving at night depends on the person. you know, my mom actually drives a lot at night, and she has a Symphony in her second surgery eye, and she loves it. I was very hesitant to have her have that for the second eye because of her driving at night, but it doesn't bother her. So it just depends on the person. And again, if unrealistic expectations, you know, don't perform any surgery. I think that applies to all of ophthalmology, but especially in these patients, especially when they're paying a lot of money out of pocket. So other things just to be mindful of, you know, no matter what the patient wants, it's really what the eye can tolerate. So we have to make sure with these patients that we're 100% spot on, you know, with their astigmatism, make sure it's very, you can either get it to, it either is less than 0.5 or you can correct it with a toric, or sometimes if you're a little bit off target, you could do a LASIK or PRK after any of these lenses too. You know, dry eye is definitely an issue. You're going to get abnormal intraocular lens readings, and also their quality of vision is not going to be good. Check the pentacam for irregularity. So any kind of irregularity, like a Sol's pathology or anything, even if it's mild, if they're debating a premium lens or paying extra for something, then I'll make sure to remove it beforehand, make it heal. If it's someone who just doesn't really mind wearing glass, getting a standard lens really isn't bothered by the Sol's, then sometimes we can just leave it as well, so not planning on having it removed down the road. Prior refractive surgery, it's on the FDA approval, that's all contraindication for these lenses, but I've actually had very good results with patients who've had prior refractive surgery with these lenses, because these are people who really want to be free from glasses. I even have a couple of RK patients that I put Symphonies in that have done really well. Obviously, you have to, you know, I warn them that, you know, there is more of a chance that they would need either refractive enhancement, or if we could do a refractive enhancement, that they may still need some glasses. But, you know, overall, I've had pretty good success with that. Most of the patients I've done that in have been myopic, prior myopic LASIK, or like I said, some RK patients. Because of the optics of these lenses, the post-hyperopic treatments might not work as well, so that's something to think about. There's not a lot of data on that. You know, check for any glaucoma, or definitely any OCT to screen for subtle pathology. So I've gotten burned on this a couple of times where I haven't checked them beforehand, and then they're just not 100%, maybe they're like 20/30, but want to be 20/20. You check, and they have a really subtle ERM on the OCT that you didn't pick up on exam. So now I try and just do an OCT, you know, I have a very low threshold to do an OCT on any patient that is thinking about one of these lenses. So over time, you know, some of these patients may be unhappy, but they tend to get a bit happier over time, but not always. And, you know, if they really are unhappy, there is always the option of switching that. My aunt had one of the old generation Restore put in elsewhere, and then one of my colleagues actually switched it for a monofocal. But this is where I was yesterday, and, you know, all these new innovations in India, and it's exciting. And I think he's been open about it, that actually one thing about the PanOptics, the artist who did all this amazing work, including on the pin, actually apparently recently had the PanOptics done here. So that, I think, is the best advertisement I've seen for that lens. So thank you.